My name is Delia, and at 32 years old, I never expected to be standing outside a conference room while my own family mocked me. What they did not know was that the mysterious billionaire investor they desperately needed was already there wearing my face. After years of being the family disappointment, the tables were about to turn in the most satisfying way possible. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to join me on this journey of sweet, sweet justice. The Callaway name has been synonymous with luxury real estate for 3 generations. My grandfather built the empire from nothing in the 1950s, transforming a small construction company into one of the largest property development firms on the East Coast. By the time I was born, Callaway Enterprises had its name on skyscrapers in 6 major cities and employed over 5,000 people. Success, wealth, and power were the air my family breathed. I never quite fit into that atmosphere. My father, Daniel Callaway, was the youngest of 4 siblings and the black sheep of the family. While his brothers and sister embraced the cutthroat world of high-stakes business, my father fell in love with art, color, and creativity. He met my mother, an art teacher from a middle-class family, during college. Their marriage caused the first major rift in the Callaway dynasty. When grandfather passed away, the family business was divided among the siblings, with the largest portion going to my uncle Harold, who had positioned himself as the natural successor. My father received the smallest share, which he eventually sold back to his siblings to fund his dream of opening an art gallery. This decision was seen as the ultimate betrayal by the rest of the family. I grew up in a modest but happy home filled with paintings, sculptures, and the sound of my parents laughing. We were comfortable but not wealthy by Callaway standards. My parents taught me the value of hard work, integrity, and following your passion. Every summer, we would visit my cousins at their massive estates, where I would feel the subtle sting of being treated differently. My clothes were not designer brands, my vacations were road trips instead of jaunts to Europe, and my education was at public school rather than prestigious academies. Everything changed when I was 16. My parents were driving home from an art exhibition when their car was hit by a drunk driver. Neither of them survived the crash. My world collapsed overnight. With no other close relatives, I moved in with Uncle Harold and Aunt Patricia. Their sprawling mansion had 6 bedrooms, but somehow they put me in the smallest guest room at the far end of the house. Life with Uncle Harold was a constant reminder that I was not a real Callaway in his eyes. At dinner parties, he would introduce his children with pride, listing their accomplishments and future roles in the company. When he got to me, it was always, "And this is Delia Daniels' daughter," as if my existence was merely an afterthought. "Business is in the Callaway blood," Harold would often say, but Daniel's line is diluted. The artistic temperament is not suited for the real world of commerce. Aunt Patricia was no better, though she disguised her disdain as concern. "Darling," she would say, patting my hand condescendingly, "perhaps we should look at community colleges for you. The Ivy League schools that Jake and Stephanie attend require a certain background that you simply did not have the privilege of experiencing." Their children, my cousins, took their cues from their parents. Jake, 2 years older than me, never missed an opportunity to flaunt his position as the heir apparent to Callaway Enterprises. Stephanie, a year younger, perfected the art of backhanded compliments. "That outfit is so brave, Delia. I could never pull off something so inexpensive." The only exception was my cousin Lisa, Aunt Patricia's niece from her first marriage, who occasionally stayed with us. She was kind and seemed genuinely embarrassed by how the others treated me, but she was away at boarding school most of the time. Despite the environment, I threw myself into my studies. I inherited my father's creativity, but also discovered a natural talent for numbers and strategy. When I was accepted to Princeton on a partial scholarship, Uncle Harold refused to contribute to the remaining tuition. "Your father chose art over family legacy," he said, examining his manicured fingernails. "He made his choice, and now you must live with the consequences. Perhaps this is a sign that you should pursue something more realistic." I worked 3 part-time jobs while maintaining a 4-point GPA. The day I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance, not a single member of the Callaway family attended the ceremony. I sat alone afterwards at a coffee shop staring at my diploma and made a promise to myself I would build my own success on my own terms, and one day they would regret underestimating me. Little did I know how spectacularly that promise would be fulfilled. After graduation, I applied to dozens of financial firms. Despite my impressive academic record, the Callaway name created complications. Some companies assumed I was trading on family connections, while others were wary of hiring me for fear of crossing my uncle, whose influence in the business world was substantial. After 2 months of rejections, I landed an entry-level position at TechFuture, a struggling tech startup desperately in need of financial organization. The founder, Ryan Wilson, was a brilliant software engineer with no head for business. The company had created an innovative asset management platform but was hemorrhaging money due to poor financial planning. During my first week, I spent every night studying their systems and finances. By Monday morning, I had prepared a detailed restructuring plan that I nervously presented to Ryan. "Holy cow, Delia," he said, eyes wide, as he flipped through my proposal. "Where did you learn to do this kind of analysis?" "Princeton taught me the theory," I replied. "But watching my family business operate taught me the practical applications. You have an amazing product, but your financial infrastructure is holding you back." Ryan implemented my suggestions, and within 6 months, TechFuture had cut costs by 30% while increasing productivity. Working closely with the development team, I noticed a significant market gap their software could fill with some modifications. The platform excelled at managing traditional assets, but lacked functionality for emerging investment categories like sustainable energy and blockchain technologies. "The old guard financial institutions are struggling to adapt to these new markets," I explained to Ryan during a late-night brainstorming session. "If we can build a bridge between traditional and emerging asset classes, we could capture a massive untapped market." Ryan was impressed but hesitant. "That would require significant development resources and expertise we do not have. Plus, the big financial players would crush us if we started competing directly with them." I recognized his concerns were valid, but could not shake the conviction that this opportunity was transformative. After 3 years at TechFuture, having helped stabilize the company and earn a modest profit, I decided it was time to strike out on my own. I had saved nearly every penny of my salary, living in a tiny studio apartment and foregoing vacations and luxuries. My first step was finding an investor who would believe in my vision without being influenced by the Callaway name. Through an industry conference, I met Marcus Winters, a venture capitalist known for backing female entrepreneurs. Over coffee, I outlined my business plan for a new kind of asset management platform. "Your idea has merit," Marcus said after carefully reviewing my proposal, "but the financial technology sector is extremely competitive. What makes you think you can succeed where so many have failed?" "Because I understand both sides of the equation," I answered confidently. "I know how traditional finance works from studying my family's business, but I am not constrained by their old-fashioned thinking. I have identified a gap that existing solutions are not addressing." Marcus agreed to provide seed funding with one condition. "I want you to create a brand that stands on its own merits, not on family connections or assumptions." That conversation led to the birth of Phoenix Assets, named to represent rising from the ashes of traditional finance. To avoid any association with the Callaway name, I used the professional identity DL, Phoenix, in all business dealings. My middle name is Louise, so the initials felt natural while providing the anonymity I needed. Building Phoenix Assets was the hardest challenge I had ever undertaken. I faced skepticism at every turn, particularly from male investors and industry veterans who dismissed me as too young and inexperienced. During one particularly demoralizing pitch meeting, a potential investor actually patted me on the head and suggested I leave finance to the big boys. Instead of being defeated, these experiences fueled my determination. I assembled a small team of brilliant minds who had been overlooked by larger firms due to their unconventional backgrounds. Jane Kim, a gifted programmer who had dropped out of MIT due to financial hardship, became my chief technology officer. Thomas Washington, a lawyer whose career had stalled because he prioritized ethics over billable hours, joined as our legal counsel. Together, we refined my original concept into a revolutionary platform that seamlessly integrated traditional and emerging asset classes. Our software could track, analyze, and optimize investment portfolios across multiple markets in real time, providing insights that existing systems could not match. The breakthrough came when we secured a contract with Green Fund, a medium-sized investment firm specializing in sustainable energy. Our platform increased their portfolio performance by 22% in the first quarter. Word spread quickly throughout the industry, and soon we had a waiting list of clients eager to implement our solution. By year 3, Phoenix Assets had grown to 48 employees and was managing over $1 billion in assets. By year 5, that figure had climbed to $15 billion, and we had opened offices in New York, San Francisco, and London. Throughout this explosive growth, I maintained my anonymity. In public materials DL, Phoenix was described as a reclusive financial genius who preferred to work through representatives. In the rare instances when my presence was absolutely required at meetings, I would attend as Delia Lewis introduced as Phoenix's senior financial analyst. The irony was not lost on me that while I was building this empire, my Callaway relatives still viewed me as the poor relation who could not possibly understand real business. At family events, which became increasingly rare as my company demanded more of my time, Uncle Harold would still introduce me with the same dismissive tone, completely unaware that his unsuccessful niece now controlled more assets than his entire company. 6 years after founding Phoenix Assets, I was scrolling through financial news on my tablet one morning when a headline caught my eye: Callaway Enterprises faces financial turmoil amid failed Dubai venture. The article detailed how my uncle's company had invested heavily in a luxury resort development in Dubai that had stalled due to regulatory issues and cost overruns. The project had already consumed over $300 million, with nothing to show for it except half-finished buildings and mounting debt. This was not entirely surprising. For years, I had watched from a distance as Uncle Harold and Jake made increasingly risky business decisions. They had abandoned the methodical, research-based approach my grandfather had used to build the company, instead chasing flashy projects that promised quick returns. The Dubai venture was merely the latest and largest in a string of missteps. I called Thomas into my office and asked him to quietly gather information about Callaway Enterprises' current financial situation. What he discovered was worse than I had imagined. The company was leveraged to the hilt with the Dubai disaster, representing just the tip of the iceberg. Harold had used company assets as collateral for personal loans. Jake had authorized excessive executive compensation packages for himself and his friends, and several sexual harassment lawsuits from former employees had been settled with non-disclosure agreements. Based on these numbers, Thomas said, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the documents, Callaway Enterprises will be insolvent within 12 to 18 months unless they secure a major cash infusion or restructure completely. I sat back in my chair, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction that Harold's arrogance had finally caught up with him. The cousin who once told me I would never understand real business was driving his inheritance into the ground. Yet another part of me felt genuine sadness. Despite everything, Callaway Enterprises represented my grandfather's legacy and employed thousands of people who had nothing to do with my uncle's poor leadership. What would it take to save the company? I asked Thomas. He looked surprised. You are not seriously considering helping them, are you? After how they treated you? I am considering all options, I replied carefully. From a purely business perspective, is there value there worth salvaging? Thomas thought for a moment before answering. The underlying assets are still valuable. The company owns prime real estate in major cities, and the Callaway brand still carries weight despite recent troubles. With proper management and restructuring, it could be returned to profitability within 3 years. Over the next week, I immersed myself in analyzing Callaway Enterprises' portfolio, financial statements, and market position. The more I studied, the more convinced I became that the company could be saved with the right intervention. The core business of luxury real estate development was still sound. It was the vanity projects and mismanagement that had created the current crisis. I made my decision. Phoenix Assets would make an offer to become the majority investor in Callaway Enterprises, providing the capital needed to resolve the immediate financial crisis in exchange for control of the company's direction. However, I would do this as DL Phoenix, not as Delia Callaway. My family would not know that their salvation was coming from the very person they had dismissed and belittled for years. Thomas prepared the initial offer, which was delivered to Harold's office by courier. The terms were straightforward but stringent: a cash infusion of $500 million in exchange for 51% ownership and significant management restructuring. The document was signed simply DL, Phoenix CEO, Phoenix Assets. The response came 3 days later. Harold was interested but wanted to meet the mysterious DL Phoenix in person before agreeing to any terms. He suggested a family meeting at his home the following week, where all key stakeholders would be present to discuss the future of Callaway Enterprises. A family meeting. The irony was delicious. For years, I had been excluded from meaningful discussions about the family business, treated as an outsider despite my Callaway blood. Now they were desperate to meet with me, though they did not know it was me they were inviting. I instructed Thomas to accept the meeting request with one condition: DL Phoenix would arrive 30 minutes after the scheduled start time. I wanted to be present for the family discussion first, in my usual role as the ignored niece, before making my grand entrance as the potential savior of the Callaway fortune. As the date approached, I received a perfunctory invitation from Aunt Patricia to attend the important family gathering. The message made it clear that while I was technically invited, my presence was not particularly valued. "We will be discussing complex business matters," she wrote, "so please do not feel obligated to attend if you have other commitments." Little did she know that I would be attending in two very different capacities, and that the fate of her comfortable lifestyle hung in the balance. The day of the family meeting arrived with unseasonable rain that seemed fitting for the storm I was about to unleash. I dressed in 2 layers. First, a simple navy blue dress that would appear professional but unremarkable to my family. Beneath it, a tailored charcoal gray suit that exuded confidence and authority. My plan was to excuse myself after the inevitable dismissal change quickly in my car and return as DL Phoenix. Uncle Harold's mansion looked exactly as I remembered it, a sprawling Georgian-style estate set on 20 acres of manicured grounds. The house itself was over 15,000 square feet of ostentatious wealth, with imported marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork chosen more for its price tag than aesthetic value. As I pulled up to the circular driveway in my modest sedan, I could not help noticing it looked shabby compared to the row of luxury vehicles already parked there. The butler, Stevens, opened the door with a practiced smile that faltered slightly when he recognized me. "Miss Delia," he said, his tone somewhere between surprise and pity. "The family is gathering in the main conference room." I nodded my thanks, suddenly flooded with memories of growing up in this house after my parents died. The endless corridors had seemed designed to remind me how far I was from belonging. Even now, as an accomplished adult, I felt a momentary flutter of that old insecurity. I silently reminded myself of who I had become when nobody was watching. The conference room was at the end of the East Wing, a space specifically designed for Callaway Enterprises business meetings. As I approached, I could hear raised voices engaged in heated discussion. I paused outside the double doors, straightened my shoulders, and knocked firmly. The conversation inside immediately ceased. After a moment, the door swung open to reveal Uncle Harold, his once handsome face, now puffy from too many expensive dinners and too much stress. He wore a tailored suit that strained slightly at the buttons, and his expression shifted from expectation to disappointment when he saw me. "Delia," he said flatly, "I did not think you would actually come." "Hello, Uncle Harold," I replied evenly. "The invitation said it was important. Family matters concern me too." He gave a dismissive chuckle that contained no actual humor. "Well, yes, technically. But this is rather advanced business discussion. Nothing that would interest you, I imagine." Despite his attempt to block the doorway, I could see past him into the room. Aunt Patricia sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and pearl necklace, creating the image of dignified wealth she had cultivated for decades. Next to her was Jake, now 34, and looking every inch the entitled heir with his designer suit and arrogant posture. Stephanie was tapping away at her phone, barely glancing up. Several other relatives were scattered around the table, along with a few men in suits who I assumed were financial advisors or lawyers. "May I come in?" I asked, maintaining eye contact with Harold. "As a Callaway, I have a right to be here for family discussions." Harold's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Jake called out from inside. "Dad, is that the mystery investor?" "Oh wait, it is just Cousin Delia." His laughter was joined by Stephanie's theatrical sigh. "Let her in," Harold Aunt Patricia said, with exaggerated patience. "She will leave once she realizes this is beyond her comprehension." Harold stepped aside reluctantly, and I entered the lion's den with my head held high. The conference room was dominated by the massive table and leather chairs, with the Callaway Enterprises logo displayed prominently on the wall. Family photos lined another wall, though I noticed none included my father or mother. "Please have a seat." Harold gestured to a chair in the corner, not at the main table. "We are waiting for an important guest, so we cannot really get into the details yet." I remained standing. "I would prefer to join the family at the table if you do not mind." "What is this meeting about?" Jake leaned back in his chair, twirling an expensive pen between his fingers. "Nothing you would understand, Delia. We are meeting with a potential investor who might save the company from some temporary cash flow issues." "Phoenix Assets," I said calmly. "DL Phoenix is offering to buy a controlling interest in Callaway Enterprises." The room fell silent. Harold's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "How do you know about that? That information is confidential." I shrugged. "I work in finance, Uncle Harold. News travels fast in our industry." Aunt Patricia gave a delicate snort. "You work for some tiny tech company, dear, hardly the same league as what we are discussing today." "Actually," I began, but Jake cut me off with a dismissive wave. "Dad, we do not have time for this. The Phoenix people will be here soon, and we need to finalize our strategy. Delia cannot possibly contribute anything valuable to this discussion." Harold nodded in agreement. "Delia, perhaps it would be best if you waited in the sitting room. Stevens can bring you some tea. We will fill you in on any relevant details later." I stood my ground. I have experience with turnaround situations. I might be able to offer some insight on the negotiations. The room erupted in laughter, led by Stephanie. "You offering business advice to us that is rich. What exactly qualifies you to weigh in on a $500 million deal?" "My education, my experience, and my results," I replied evenly. "Phoenix Assets has a reputation for strict terms but fair dealings. If you go into this meeting with your usual arrogance, you will lose everything." Harold's face flushed deep red. He strode toward me, finger pointing at my face. "Now you listen here. Your father abandoned this family to play with paintbrushes. You have lived off our charity and have the audacity to lecture us about business. You know nothing about what it takes to run a company of this magnitude." "I know enough not to invest $300 million in a Dubai resort without proper due diligence," I countered, holding his gaze. The room went deadly quiet. Harold's eyes bulged, and for a moment I thought he might actually strike me. Instead, he grabbed my elbow and began steering me toward the door. "This meeting is for successful family members only," he hissed. "Not charity cases who think reading the Wall Street Journal makes them financial experts." I pulled my arm free but allowed him to guide me out. This confrontation was going exactly as I had anticipated, and I needed to leave anyway to prepare for my return as DL Phoenix. "You need this investment to survive, Uncle Harold," I said quietly as we reached the door. "Perhaps a little humility would serve you better than continuing to alienate family." Harold's face contorted with rage. "You are not family. You are a burden we have carried out of obligation. Now get out before you embarrass yourself further." With that, he shoved me into the hallway and slammed the door in my face, his parting smirk burning into my memory. "This is for successful family members only," he repeated through the door loud enough for everyone inside to hear. As I walked away, I heard laughter from the conference room, undoubtedly at my expense. But unlike all the previous times I had been humiliated by the Callaways, this time I was not fighting back tears. Instead, I was checking my watch and smiling. I had exactly 28 minutes to transform from the dismissed, underestimated Delia into DL Phoenix, the billionaire investor holding the fate of Callaway Enterprises in her hands. I drove a mile down the road to a small park where I had parked my second car earlier that morning, a sleek black Tesla with tinted windows. Opening the trunk, I retrieved my briefcase containing everything I needed for the transformation. The simple navy dress came off, revealing the perfectly tailored charcoal suit underneath. I added a pair of designer glasses, styled my hair from a casual ponytail into a sleek chignon, and applied a bold red lipstick that I never wore as everyday Delia. The final touch was a platinum Rolex watch that had been my first major purchase after Phoenix Assets crossed the $1 billion valuation mark. Looking in the car mirror, I barely recognized myself. This was not the Delia that the Callaways dismissed. This was D.L. Phoenix financial powerhouse and their potential savior. I called Jane, who was waiting nearby with Thomas and our small team of advisors. Are we ready? All set, Jane confirmed. Thomas has the contracts prepared with both scenarios we discussed. The car is 2 minutes out. Perfect. Remember, follow my lead. No matter what happens in there, show no reaction that would give away our connection. Got it, boss. Though I have to say I cannot wait to see their faces. I smiled. That makes 2 of us. A luxury black SUV pulled up, and Jane stepped out with 3 other members of our team, all dressed in impeccable business attire. Thomas joined us from his car carrying a leather portfolio containing the contracts that would determine the future of Callaway Enterprises. Everyone clear on their roles, I asked, surveying my team. They all nodded, professionals to the core, despite the unusual circumstances. Then let us go save a company from itself. We arrived at the mansion precisely 30 minutes after I had been ejected from the family meeting. Stevens opened the door, his eyes widening slightly at the impressive group before him. You must be the representatives from Phoenix Assets, he said, bowing slightly. The family is expecting you. I am D.L. Phoenix, I replied in a voice pitched slightly lower than my normal speaking tone. These are my associates. Please inform Mr. Callaway that we have arrived. Stevens hurried away, and I could hear the sudden burst of activity from the direction of the conference room. My team and I waited in the grand foyer, deliberately taking our time as I pointed out various architectural features of the house as if I were seeing them for the first time. Harold appeared moments later, his earlier anger completely masked behind a veneer of corporate charm. He had straightened his tie and somehow managed to button his jacket despite its tightness. Miss Phoenix, welcome to my home, he said, extending his hand. We are honored to meet you in person. I must say your reputation precedes you, though few people claim to have actually met the mysterious D.L. Phoenix. I shook his hand firmly, looking directly into the eyes of the man who had shown me the door less than an hour ago. Mr. Callaway, thank you for the invitation. I prefer to let my results speak for themselves rather than seeking the spotlight. If he noticed anything familiar about me, he gave no indication. The power of preconception is remarkable. Harold saw what he expected to see: a powerful business figure, not his unsuccessful niece. He led us to the conference room, chattering nervously about the mansion's history. When we entered, the entire Callaway clan was arranged around the table, all traces of their earlier discord hidden behind practiced smiles. Jake stood immediately, adjusting his tie and putting on what I recognized as his charming business air persona. Miss Phoenix, I am Jake Callaway, Executive Vice President of Operations, he said, extending his hand with a confidence that did not reach his eyes. We are all very excited about the potential partnership between our companies. I gave him a cool professional handshake. Mr. Callaway, I have reviewed your operational decisions over the past 5 years with great interest. His smile faltered slightly at my neutral tone. Clearly, he had expected immediate charm to work its usual magic. Harold guided me to the head of the table, the seat he normally occupied. Please, Miss Phoenix, we would be honored if you would take the primary position. Thank you, but I prefer this seat, I replied, choosing instead the exact corner chair where he had tried to relegate me earlier. My team will join us at the table. Jane, Thomas, and the others smoothly took their positions, leaving Harold momentarily flustered before he recovered. Of course, of course. Now shall we begin? I believe you have a proposal that could be beneficial to both our organizations. I took my time removing documents from my briefcase, aware that every eye in the room was fixed on me. Before we discuss terms, I want to ensure I have a complete understanding of Callaway Enterprises' current situation. Perhaps you could walk me through the events that led to your current financial position. Harold cleared his throat. Well, as you know, the global real estate market has faced unprecedented challenges. Our Dubai investment encountered some unexpected regulatory hurdles that temporarily affected our liquidity. You invested $320 million in a project without securing proper permits first, based on the recommendation of a golf buddy rather than professional consultants, I interrupted calmly. The resulting cash flow crisis has left you unable to meet obligations on 4 other developments and placed you in technical default on $200 million in loans. Is that assessment accurate? The room went deathly quiet. Jake's mouth literally hung open while Harold's face cycled through several interesting shades of red. Well, that is. How did you? Harold stammered. "Idome homework, Mr. Calloway," I replied. Just as I researched the 3 sexual harassment settlements that were paid out of company funds rather than personal accounts and the executive compensation packages that increased by 70%, while company performance declined by 22%. Aunt Patricia made a small choking sound, while Stephanie had finally put down her phone and was staring at me with a mixture of shock and growing suspicion. Now I continued, let me be clear about what Phoenix Assets is offering. We will provide the capital necessary to stabilize Callaway Enterprises and restructure its debt. In exchange, we require 51% ownership and significant management changes, including new approval protocols for all investments over $10 million. Harold had recovered enough to attempt regaining control of the meeting. "Those terms seem rather harsh, Miss Phoenix. Perhaps we could discuss a minority investment with less invasive oversight requirements." I smiled thinly. "Mr. Calloway, you are not in a position to negotiate. 3 of your lenders have already approached Phoenix Assets about purchasing your debt, which would allow us to force bankruptcy proceedings. I am offering you a chance to maintain some control and preserve the Callaway name on the company your father built. That offer expires at the end of this meeting." The atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. Gone was the arrogant family that had mocked me an hour ago. In their place sat a group of frightened people suddenly confronting the consequences of their poor decisions. Thomas slid contracts across the table. "These documents outline the complete terms of our offer. You will note that they include provisions for current management to remain in advisory roles during the transition, provided they cooperate fully with the new leadership team." As the Callaways began anxiously flipping through the documents, Stephanie suddenly slapped her hand on the table. "Wait a minute," she said, staring at me intently. "There is something familiar about you." I met her gaze calmly, but before she could pursue her thought, Thomas smoothly interjected with a question about one of the contract clauses, drawing Harold and Jake's attention. Eventually, Harold looked up from the papers, his expression grim. "These terms are quite stringent, Miss Phoenix. Would you mind if my family and I took a brief moment to discuss privately?" "Of course," I replied. "My team and I will wait in the foyer. You have 15 minutes." As we left the room, I could hear the furious whispering begin before the door even closed. In the foyer, Jane leaned close to me. "They have no idea, do they? Not even a suspicion." "Stephanie might," I murmured. "But the men are too blinded by their preconceptions to see what is right in front of them." Exactly 14 minutes later, Stevens appeared to escort us back to the conference room. The atmosphere had changed. Resignation hung in the air like heavy perfume. Harold stood as we entered. "Miss Phoenix, we are prepared to accept your terms with a few minor amendments we hope you will consider." I nodded. "Let us hear them." The amendments were predictable attempts to preserve their excessive compensation and decision-making authority. I rejected each one calmly but firmly. Finally, with the reality of their situation fully sinking in, Harold reluctantly agreed to the original terms. As Thomas guided them through the signature process, I maintained my professional demeanor, but inside, I was experiencing a complex mixture of emotions. This was not merely about revenge. It was about correcting years of mismanagement and preserving the legacy my grandfather had built. When the final signature was in place, I stood and extended my hand to Harold. "Congratulations, Mr. Calloway. You have made the right decision for the company. I look forward to working together during this transition." Harold's handshake was limp, his eyes downcast. "Yes, well, I suppose we should be grateful for your intervention, Miss Phoenix." I smiled. "Indeed you should. Oh, and one more thing before we conclude." I removed my glasses slowly and looked each family member in the eye. "I believe a family member of yours tried to attend this meeting earlier, but was told it was for successful family members only. That was an unfortunate choice of words. Would not you agree?" Harold frowned in confusion. "I do not see how that is relevant to our agreement." "It is entirely relevant," I replied, "because that family member was me." The silence that followed my revelation was absolute. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke as the impossible truth sank in. Harold's face went from confusion to disbelief to horror in rapid succession. Jake looked like he might vomit. Aunt Patricia clutched her pearls so tightly I thought the strand might break. Stephanie was the first to find her voice. Delia, that is impossible. You cannot be D.L. Phoenix. D.L. Phoenix is a financial genius worth billions. D.L., I said slowly. Delia Louise. My initials. The company I built from nothing while you were all too busy looking down your noses at me to notice what I was accomplishing. Harold shook his head violently. No, this is some kind of trick. You work for that little tech company. You have never had the business acumen or resources to build something like Phoenix Assets. Thomas cleared his throat and placed another document on the table. This is the complete corporate registration for Phoenix Assets, showing Miss Delia Louise Calloway as the founder-majority shareholder and CEO since inception 6 years ago. The company currently manages over $60 billion in assets and employs 212 people worldwide. Jake lunged forward and grabbed the paper, his eyes frantically scanning the document. This cannot be real, he muttered. Delia is nothing. She has always been nothing. And yet I replied calmly, I now own controlling interest in Calloway Enterprises. Interesting how life works out, is it not? Harold collapsed back into his chair, his face ashen. Why would you do this? Is this all some elaborate revenge scheme? I shook my head. If I wanted revenge, I would have let the company fail and bought the pieces at bankruptcy auction. This is about preserving what my grandfather built, despite your best efforts to run it into the ground. The fact that it comes with the bonus of teaching you all some humility is merely a satisfying side effect. I turned to face Aunt Patricia, who was dabbed at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief in a performance of distress. Do you remember when you refused to let me attend Stephanie's wedding? You said it would be awkward to have the poor relation there among so many successful people. That same month, I closed a deal that added $6 billion to Phoenix Assets' portfolio. My gaze shifted to Jake. And you, cousin. Do you recall when you tried to convince the executor of my parents' estate that their life insurance money should go to the family business instead of my college fund? You argued that education would be wasted on me since I would never amount to anything in business anyway. Last year, Phoenix Assets was named Financial Services Company of the Year while you were busy losing hundreds of millions in Dubai. Jake had the decency to look away, unable to meet my eyes. I finally turned back to Harold. As for you, Uncle, when I graduated college and asked for a chance to work at Calloway Enterprises, you told me there was no place for charity cases in your organization. You said, and I quote, "Business is for people who understand the value of money, not artists' children playing at being financiers." Harold's shoulders slumped. For the first time in my memory, he looked genuinely defeated. I was wrong, he whispered, so quietly I almost did not hear him. What was that, I asked, leaning forward slightly. I said I was wrong, he repeated louder this time. About you, about your potential. Clearly I was wrong. The admission hung in the air, more valuable to me than any financial victory could ever be. After all these years, after all the dismissals and humiliations, Harold Calloway had admitted he was wrong. A movement at the far end of the table caught my attention. Cousin Lisa, who had been silent throughout the meeting, stood up. I always knew you were smart, Delia. I am sorry I did not stay in better touch or stand up for you more when we were younger. I gave her a genuine smile. Thank you, Lisa. Your kindness was rare in this family, and I have not forgotten it. One by one, the reality of the situation settled over the Calloways. Their expressions ranged from shock to anger to grudging respect. Stephanie kept shaking her head in disbelief, while Aunt Patricia seemed to be mentally recalculating every interaction we had ever had, now viewed through this new lens. So what happens now? Harold finally asked. Do you fire us all, dismantle what we have built? What you have nearly destroyed, you mean? I corrected him. But no. As the contracts stipulate, there will be a transition period during which you will continue in advisory roles. Your future with the company beyond that point will depend entirely on your performance, your cooperation, and your ability to adapt to a new management philosophy. I stood, signaling that the meeting was coming to a close. The first board meeting with the new ownership structure will take place next Monday at 9 a.m. at Phoenix Assets headquarters. I expect all signatories to these agreements to be present. My team will send the details to your offices tomorrow." As we gathered our materials to leave, Harold made one last attempt to regain some dignity. "The Phoenix name," he said. "Why a phoenix?" I paused at the door and looked back at the family that had once made me feel so small. Because a phoenix rises from the ashes of what came before. It transforms destruction into rebirth. It takes what others have discarded and creates something beautiful and powerful. I allowed myself a small smile. Also, grandfather always said that the best revenge is massive success. He was right about that, as he was about many things. With those words, I walked out of the room, my team following behind me. As we left the mansion that had once been my prison, I felt no triumph, no gloating satisfaction. Instead, I felt something I had not expected, a sense of completion, as if a circle that had been open for years had finally closed. In the car, Jane finally let out the laugh she had been suppressing. I have never seen so many entitled people look so thoroughly shocked in my entire life. That was better than any movie. Thomas nodded in agreement. The legal documents certainly helped drive the point home, though I am still processing the fact that Harold Calloway actually admitted he was wrong. I would have bet good money against that ever happening. I looked back at the mansion growing smaller in the distance. People can surprise you, sometimes in terrible ways and sometimes in ways that remind you of their humanity. I turned back to my team, the people who had believed in me when my own family had not. Now we have a company to rebuild. Let us make sure it is stronger than it ever was before. 18 months have passed since the day I walked into Harold's mansion as Delia and walked out as the controlling owner of Calloway Enterprises. Those months have been filled with more work than I ever imagined, more resistance than I anticipated, and ultimately more healing than I thought possible. The transition was not smooth at first. Harold struggled to accept his diminished role, often attempting to circumvent the new approval processes we had implemented. Jake was worse, sabotaging meetings and spreading discontent among longtime employees loyal to the old regime. After 3 warnings and 2 significant incidents that could have damaged client relationships, I was forced to remove Jake from his position entirely. He now works for a former competitor in a much smaller role, his arrogance tempered by the reality of his reduced circumstances. Harold, however, surprised me. After the initial resistance, something shifted in him. Perhaps it was seeing the company begin to thrive under new management, or perhaps it was simple acceptance of reality. Whatever the cause, he gradually became a valuable advisor, particularly on relationships with long-standing clients who respected the Calloway name. We will never be close, but we have developed a professional respect that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. Aunt Patricia took the longest to adjust to the new reality. For months, she avoided me entirely, canceling her attendance at any event where I might be present. Then, on the anniversary of my parents' death, she appeared at my office with a small package. "These were your mother's," she said awkwardly, handing me a velvet box containing a pair of pearl earrings. "Harold's father gave them to her as a wedding gift. I should have passed them to you years ago." It was a small gesture, but from Patricia, it represented a seismic shift. We now have tea together once a month. Our conversations are still somewhat stilted, but the naked hostility is gone, replaced by something approaching civility. Stephanie eventually reached out as well, though in her own way. She invited me to be featured in a charity fashion show she was organizing, introducing me to her social circle as my brilliant cousin who saved the family business. The introduction was delivered with a smile that still held traces of her old condescension, but it was progress nonetheless. The most meaningful relationship to emerge from this upheaval has been with Lisa. Once she realized I held no grudge for the past, she became a regular visitor to my office, eager to learn about the business and contribute her own considerable talents. She now heads our newly established Calloway Foundation, which provides scholarships and mentoring to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who show promise in business and finance. As for Calloway Enterprises, the company has undergone a remarkable transformation. We divested from the troubled Dubai project, restructured our debt, and refocused on the core business of luxury real estate development in markets we thoroughly understand. New protocols ensure that all major investments undergo rigorous analysis rather than being approved based on personal connections or gut feelings. Most importantly, we established a corporate culture that values merit over name, innovation over tradition, and integrity over appearance. Many talented employees who had been overlooked in the old regime have flourished with new opportunities to prove their worth. Phoenix Assets continues to operate as a separate entity, though we have created strategic partnerships between the two companies where it makes business sense. Jane now serves as CEO, allowing me to focus on my role as chairperson of both organizations. Thomas heads our combined legal department, bringing his ethical approach to all our dealings. Last month, we held a ceremony dedicating the new Callaway Enterprises headquarters. The building stands on the site of my father's old art gallery, which had been shuttered after his death. The lobby features a permanent exhibition of his work alongside pieces by emerging artists from the community arts program we established in his name. During my speech, I spoke about how my father's creative vision informs our business approach, seeking beauty and meaning in our projects, rather than merely chasing profit. Harold attended the ceremony, standing quietly at the back. Afterwards, he approached me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Your father would be proud," he said, studying one of the paintings on display. "He always saw things the rest of us missed. You inherited that from him." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by the acknowledgement. "I was wrong about another thing," he continued. "I always said Daniel chose art over family legacy. But looking at what you have built, I see now that he simply understood legacy differently than I did. His legacy lives on through you in ways none of us could have predicted." As Harold walked away, I realized that my journey had come full circle. For years, I had driven myself to succeed, partly out of a desire to prove my family wrong, to force them to acknowledge my worth. That motivation had fueled my early ambitions, but somewhere along the way, it had transformed into something more meaningful. Success became not about proving others wrong, but about proving myself right. Right about my vision, my abilities, and the company I was building. The greatest lesson I have learned is that true success is not measured by the validation we receive from others, especially those who have underestimated us. It is measured by the impact we have on the world around us, the opportunities we create for others, and the legacy we build that extends beyond our own achievements. I no longer define myself in relation to the family that once dismissed me. I am neither the poor relation nor the triumphant conqueror. I am simply Delia Callaway, a woman who built something valuable by believing in herself when no one else would. If my story resonates with you, perhaps you too have experienced the sting of being underestimated or dismissed by those whose approval you once craved. Let me tell you what I wish someone had told me years ago: their limitation in seeing your worth does not define your potential. The people who cannot recognize your value are not qualified to determine your future. Have you ever been underestimated by family or colleagues? How did you respond to their doubt? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey of resilience and redemption spoke to you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of transformation. Remember to share this video with someone who might need to hear that being underestimated can be the greatest gift if it leads you to prove your worth on your own terms. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the most satisfying success is the kind no one sees coming.